America's center of power changed, and with it, the dynamics of the political landscape. The consequences will reverberate locally, in Florida, on Capitol Hill, and on the global stage. Voters demanded change on the issues that mattered most: the economy, immigration, and social issues. Now, News4JAX goes beyond the headlines with political analysts who provide unique context and perspective. Experts focused on the issues making headlines. This is Politics and Power.
The battle over redrawing congressional districts is being called corrupt and rigged by some and not in the voters' interests. Is it even constitutional? Fact is, the battle for control of Congress in the midterms may be over before the voting even starts. It all has to do with the political war that is ongoing concerning redistricting. And Florida is closely watching the battle in Texas, and many assume it'll follow the Lone Star State's lead. And now California has entered the fray in a politically charged and high-stakes, high-risk move for Gavin Newsom. Welcome to Politics and Power, Bruce Hamilton, and joining me, political analyst Daniel Cronrath. Thanks as always for joining us.
Thanks for having me back, Bruce.
So Daniel, Republicans in Florida have to deal with the Fair District Amendments, provisions that the majority of voters added to the Florida Constitution in 2010 to prevent gerrymandering. Governor DeSantis said this likely conflicts with the U.S. Constitution. In 2019, the Supreme Court ruled that partisan gerrymandering was not unconstitutional. And when asked about that, his response was a flippant, "I would just say, stay tuned on that." If there's a move to violate the Voting Act, won't there be a move to block it?
Oh, well, sure. There's going to be legal challenges, Bruce, which come out of this. This is a new kind of revolution in our politics, but it really is sticking with this larger trend that the United States gets accused of globally around the world, that we're really the only nation in which our elected officials choose their voters and our voters don't choose our elected officials. When you're getting into the kind of gamesmanship that you're willing to upset the Article 1, Section 2 idea of reapportionment every 10 years to redraw your House seats, and you lack the patience simply because of partisanship in today's political environment, that you're willing to say, we look like we're going to lose the House, we see our public opinion polling, we're in bad shape right now, so we need to go away and we need to find to gin the game here so that we can still maintain power. It's new. Okay, but in an era where we're living in, Bruce, with hyperpartisanship, it really should not be that surprising.
Yeah, Florida State Speaker Daniel Perez is creating a committee to look at drawing up new districts. So now you have Florida joining this political Donnybrook sweeping the nation from New York to Texas, Indiana, and California. DeSantis called the last census flawed and wants a new one done that would not count anyone in the country illegally. President Trump wants the same. Two issues here. Florida doesn't seem to be waiting for a new census. And don't they need a constitutional amendment change to have that census done?
Yeah, well, it's just kind of rich politically, because if you go back to 2020, Bruce, when we were actually completing the census, it was Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump who were telling people not to return their census information. Okay? Then, lo and behold, Florida doesn't get the 2 additional seats that by population deserved. It only gets 1. But now, 5 years later, since the Republicans are in a political situation where they don't want to lose the House. Oh, yes, well, we should have had that from the very beginning. Bruce, you can roll back the tape. They proactively told people not to return their census information. Okay? So they did this to themselves. This is very much like why the Republicans didn't have the Senate in 2020, because Donald Trump told people to stay home in Georgia, that the election was fixed. And then lo and behold, every Republican in Georgia listened to Donald Trump. And you take that out to a third leg, which I know is beyond the gerrymandering. It's the whole idea now of the president recently, as of yesterday, suggesting he wants to eliminate mail-in ballots in the United States. It's just yet another way to try to control the outcome of an election, because I think the president, and quite mistakenly, thinks by eliminating paper ballots that that's somehow going to help his cause in getting reelected. Well, listen, Bruce, folks who are older vote for Democrats and Republicans. Folks who have disabilities vote for Democrats and Republicans. Individuals, especially serving in our military, vote predominantly enlisted soldiers for Republicans. So now are you just going to go through the law and encourage these states to carve out big swaths for the people you think might vote for your party and then eliminate other people? Well, coming all the way back, that is essentially what this gerrymandering effort is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is putting together districts, which are solidly going to be in your favor, marginalizing the ability of your opponent to win, and narrow, by the way, Bruce, relative to your legal point, marginalizing those votes. We live in a country where the Supreme Court has said repeatedly, we have the idea of one person, one vote. And what this really is trying to do is it's trying to make individuals of the non-favored political party less valuable.
Yeah, and by the way, the president number one, doesn't have the power to do that. And number two, on the issue of the census, you got to hire census workers. Taking a census takes time. Counting the census takes time. It's not realistic. On the issue of the mail-in ballots, he can't do it. He can't do it by executive order.
No.
He doesn't have the power to do it. Doesn't he realize? I guess he doesn't realize that.
Yeah, I don't think he does realize that, Bruce. The reality is that our Constitution does have reserved powers to the states, and it speaks. There's very, very little in our federal Constitution directly about how we conduct elections in the United States. Mm-hmm. We know that they request the states to hold, obviously, congressional elections following every. Reapportionment following every census to hold congressional elections, and then also that the states are required to submit electors to be chosen by the electorate for the Electoral College. Outside of that, clearly we've had things like the Voting Rights Act and the Federal Election Commission, which have been created in the 20th century to try to basically correct a lot of the issues with our voting system, ensure that there's equity amongst the races in our voting system. But I think one of the big key things here, too, that a lot of your audience is probably already familiar with, the Supreme Court has said, to your point in the promo, you are not allowed to discriminate based on race. You are absolutely allowed to discriminate based on party, if that is what your state has made the decision to do. And let's make no mistake about this. Republicans in Texas, and now Republicans in Florida, are looking at doing exactly that. They're looking at a way to negate any kind of voting advantage that their opponent may have. In the case of Florida, this is going to be tough, Bruce. They've already, Governor DeSantis, and even going back even with the Fair Districts Amendment in 2010, has already gerrymandered this state so badly.
You're talking about that when they redrew the lines a few years ago.
Of course.
And they tried to, disparage black voters.
Right. Congressman Lawson here from the Tallahassee area in the old district, I think it was Council District 3, maybe before, forgive me for that.
Over in the Panhandle.
Yeah, went out to Tallahassee, that's correct, through the northern part of the state. Traditionally an African-American here district, but however, there was no real cause there because it was, pretty much just a, partisan concern and not a racial concern, which was what the courts looked at when that was challenged. But to my point, 28 congressional seats is what we have in Florida. The governor would like to see 29. Again, he could have had that if he had encouraged folks to return their census information. Already 20 of them are Republican. So it's going to be very fascinating to see what they can possibly do with these maps in Florida that they haven't already previously tried to do. As a refresher, and this seems like an eternity ago in our politics, Bruce, Andrew Gillum only lost to Ron DeSantis in 2018 by 1% of the vote. Okay, Barack Obama won Florida twice. So while Florida is solidly Republican, at top level of elections, we've demonstrated the ability in the not so recent past to be a purple state. 20 out of the 28 districts are already Republican, and they're expecting to squeeze that even further. It's going to be very fascinating to see what these districts look like.
Yeah, it's interesting what Florida's Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried called this what's going on today. She said corruption, plain and simple. And she goes on to say this is nothing more than a desperate attempt to rig the system further and silence voters before the 2026 election. She's talking about the midterms. She calls it stealing elections. Is it that simple?
It is if you're Nikki Fried, for sure. Yeah, no, if you're a Democrat here in Florida and you're watching this take place, of course. You're basically, but here's the thing. I would say that it's not so much the process of gerrymandering itself. We've already talked about the unfortunate legality of that, okay, as the Supreme Court has determined that to be. It's the nature of what they're trying to do. It puts me in mind, Bruce, a similar situation when you were asking me to think about this question, was back in our home state of Pennsylvania in 2012. When the Republicans tried to pass voter ID for the first time 4 months before a presidential election, specifically targeting those individuals who were older, who were black, who had never had a written form of, ever had a driver's license before.
Clearly an attempt to manipulate.
And under the guise of trying to eliminate voter fraud. Of course, when they went to the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court and they asked them to demonstrate any voter fraud, they could not do it and lost the case because there was none, right? It's a very, very similar tactic. You're taking something which on the surface has a threat of legality, okay? Something that you couldn't, we know gerrymandering exists, we know how it's done, but then the timing. Why are you doing it now? And let's also, too, and this is also important to note, let's consider the precedent here. Do we as Americans want to be drawing our congressional districts again every 2 years across the country just so we can play partisan hack games with who's going to have a perceived advantage going into this election to the next election? This, in my mind, Bruce, is akin to folks who, in the Democratic Party I hear right now, who want to change the number of people on the Supreme Court. Because it's inconvenient to them right now what that number is. I think it's a very, very dangerous precedent, Bruce, but it's very reflective of where we're at right now in our partisan politics.
And the American public doesn't, want to hear about the reality. You know, they just want to hear about the rhetoric.
Yeah, well, and then the other thing, too, is Republicans want to win. Yeah. And this is you know, the show's called Politics and Power. And this is really what we're talking about here, man. We are talking about the exercise in political value. Throughout the course of my life, if you were to ask somebody for all the pros and all the cons, ask somebody to give you a definition of a liberal, okay? Liberal Democrats are typically people who value systems. You'll hear, even today, you'll hear national Democrats bemoan the loss of bipartisanship. And where have their brothers and sisters in the Republican Party gone? I can tell you where they've gone, Bruce. They've gone to win elections, is what they've done. And they've taken these norms. And you'll notice before, like when the Democrats wanted to do things in the Senate, they were like, oh, we can't fire the Senate parliamentarian. Republicans are like, parliamentarian, schmarliamentarian, they're gone. We're doing this. This is our legislative agenda. So you still see those big divides, which not only in policy, but also in politics. Republicans understand the power game, man. They are willing to do it.
And Democrats don't.
And they quite often do not. Of course, we could talk about what Governor Newsom's doing now with some of his, but that's the reality of it, because they're still stuck in kind of a Chuck Schumer age of gentility.
Right.
They're waiting for gentility to come back to the Senate, where him and maybe old Orrin Hatch from Utah go out and get lunch together, and they just gone. Those days are gone, and the Democrats have got to catch up to that, man, or they're just going to continue to get slaughtered in these elections.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up, and we're going to get more to how people are playing the game differently now, like Gavin Newsom, even Nancy Pelosi, because if you look back to Pelosi's stance a number of years ago, you know, she had a much different approach, and that's all changing, and, you know, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk a bit about history, and you alluded to this. The redrawing of congressional districts every 10 years used to be one of those important but, you know, really rather boring procedures that state legislators had to do. Have we gotten to the point where things are becoming so politically rigged, and I'm going to use that term because it is rigged, that the only thing that matters is incumbent protection and partisan favoritism?
Yeah, sure. And let's check out or talk about the flip side of this really fast.
Yeah.
What happens when you have a Republican Party who is so committed to redrawing seats in the middle of a census cycle, right? So that they can give themselves an advantage in red states, so that they can add, hypothetically, they're suggesting now 5 seats in the state of Texas. What ends up happening is when people like Gavin Newsom do get involved, California does the same thing. And California is now going to be able to try to shift projections of up to 7 additional seats for Democrats. Now, why is that the case? California is a state that many years ago, they decided both the Republican and Democratic Party, it was in the best interest of their state, and this was voter-led, okay, that they would form a bipartisan commission to decide to redraw their congressional districts, okay? Across the board, where does it make sense community-wise? Where does it make sense population-wise? We're not going to draw funny little shapes. If you live in the Fresno area, there's going to be a Fresno district. If you live in the Bakersfield area, there's going to be a Bakersfield district. And this is the way we're going to do our realignment. Well, Bruce, if the Republicans want to go that way in Texas, this is what the Democrats are saying now. We can also find a way to break what we consider to be this good government practice of having a bipartisan commission to fairly draw these seats. And we're going to do exactly what you've been doing to us. And by the way, the Democrats have their own example. They've been doing this in Maryland for a long time, man. Maryland has 8 congressional seats. 7 of them are Democrat. Okay? Let's not think that there's only like 1 in 8 people in Maryland who are Republicans. They've been doing the same kind of tactic, but now we're just blowing it up to a much bigger, you're talking California, you're talking about New York, that even with population shifts remains the 2nd biggest Democratic state. At the end of the day, Bruce, and I've seen some folks do this because they have more time and capacity in their lives than you and I, this may backfire on the Republicans. It's very possible that if every Democratic state were to fully engage, the Democrats could gain seats going into 2026. Again, mindful of court challenges which may stop all of this, because it's only going to take 1 federal court and 1 federal judge in order to put a halt to what's taking place.
You know, I don't think that the electorate understands that this is all about the voter be damned in all of this. This is all about us keeping our jobs.
Oh, man, we are the ones losing.
Yeah.
There's to any viewer out there who's watching us on YouTube or your digital streaming, if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, we're the losers here.
Yeah. And the American
because
electorate,
we are losing our influence. You know, beyond the idea of gerrymandering, the shortening or reducing the ways that we can vote, the outlandish control of money in our politics right now with corporations being viewed as people after the Citizens United case, and the fact that, you know, Kamala Harris, to have an unsuccessful run for president, dropped over $1 billion in 4 months to get that done. This is just a further erosion, Bruce, of the connection that we have to our elected officials, which is supposed to be, not as small d, the bedrock of our democracy.
right. Now, I'll tell you what, watch Politics in Power next week, because we're going to talk about Doge and what an illusion that was. And, you know, how the American economy, how the American public's health and safety has been compromised by what's going on because of the self-interest of the politicians.
Yeah, and a good follow-up, too, is the number of people, for folks who turn into that show, and I will, of course, the number of people now who are being hired back because they've realized after the optics.
We screwed up.
Right, after the optics of firing all these people, and they realized what the actual front line was that they were doing. Just because somebody is a U.S. government consultant and not an employee, there's a reason why they're probably a consultant. They're doing work outside of our government that we needed to have done in a wide variety of areas, which the Doge folks are now finding out about.
Exactly. All right, when politics and power continues, the Democratic parties, and forget the labels that we're putting on here, because actually, some of today's Democrats are yesterday's Republicans, because those labels are very misleading today, and people look things in black and white terms, and you can't. The Democratic Party's dramatic flip-flop, and here's what we were talking about, in an attempt to end partisan gerrymandering. Oh, how things have changed when politics and power continues. Welcome back to Politics and Power. Bruce Hamilton, along with my buddy, political analyst Daniel Cronrath. It is interesting to note that the last time House Democrats held the majority, they made a sweeping package of good government reforms, including an attempt to end partisan gerrymandering. A centerpiece. The centerpiece of their legislative agenda. Nancy Pelosi was the House Speaker at the time, and I'm not endorsing her here, but at the time she said in 2021, listen to this, the people should choose their politicians. Politicians should not be choosing their voters. The House passed the bill, but it died in the Senate. My point is that today, in 2025, Democrats are abandoning their push for reforms, and they're cheering on leaders like California Governor Gavin Newsom, who say their party must fight fire with fire. Man, how things have changed, and that's what you were talking about before. So you've got the Democrats who are now playing like the Republicans, and they're saying like, well, the hell with the voters. You know what? We got to go ahead and, go ahead and do what we have to keep these House seats or gain House seats back. We don't care what the voters think.
Right.
So it's all about us.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about this, Bruce. If you were to ask the average person out there in the street what kind of value that they place in public opinion polls, many voters will just tell you, well, the polls don't matter. I vote the way I want to vote. Polling is a very, very overrated thing. Look how often polls are wrong. Yeah. We hear about margin for error and, why things like that happen. But it's just a poll. Guess who pays attention to these polls? Political figures, the Democrats. They realize their national popularity rates right now are at 27, 28%. It was a different political landscape in 2020, 2021 when the Democrats were outpolling the Republicans across the board. When the Democrats in 2020, think about this, were winning the Electoral College and Joe Biden was beating Donald Trump by millions of votes in a popular election.
I have to point out, they've also changed the way they do polls. Now they do them by phone. The samplings are a lot smaller.
Yeah.
Your basic economic reality plays into that.
Right. Sure, but the point of it is that the Democrats are sensitive to this.
Yes.
They see that they're not as popular, that they're waning in popularity. I mean, my goodness, just to get off the Democrats a little bit, Donald Trump is historically unpopular relative to these same polls. And the Democrats are winning next year's election cycle by what generic ballot? 2 points? 3 points? I mean, in any
Not
other...
even by the margin of error.
No, in any other political reality right now, with this president being this unpopular, following Doge, following his brutal treatment of people who are immigrants, regardless of what you think about the goal of removing illegal immigrants from the United States, just some of the horrific images and people being removed from their trials to determine whether or not they're going to be able to stay here in the United States illegally through their immigration proceedings, being arrested at Home Depots. These are not made up stories of what's going on, and the American people are responding to that, which is why you're seeing his polling collapse.
Also because of the economy.
And because of the economy. And because the American people still realize that inflation has not gone away. Donald Trump can say it's going away all day long. He's not going to, Winn-Dixie, Publix, and other places here in town and still seeing egg prices at twice where they were before the COVID pandemic, okay? So people know that. They see that. What does that mean going back again? If you're a Democrat out there and you still can't make traction in trying to win a competitive election, well, then what do you have left really than taking those good government reforms and throwing them in the waste bag? It's the only way you're going to be. And I tell you what, Bruce, I guarantee you once they start to do that, that'll be popular with Democrats because there is a fatigue within the Democratic Party right now. They have lost a lot of trust in their leadership. They feel that Senator Schumer, they feel that Representative Jeffries are out of touch with the actual rank and file Democrat. And they're tired of a lack of fight. I mean, you'll remember, I think it was Hakeem Jeffries who literally said when Trump was getting ready for the big, beautiful bill, he's like, we will fight, we're going to be here, we're going to fight. And then 7 days later, he's like, well, what do you want us to do? We're in the minority. That does not land with Democrats who want you to do anything. in order to stop that right now. So I think that's a lot of what's going on, Bruce. I think that they're going to be willing to take their penchant for good government, which I would also say, can I be really cynical with you for a second?
No.
Is I think that penchant for good government was done from a position of political security. At the time, Pelosi and the Democrats were championing that. It played well. They had safe majority numbers. They didn't think that they would have to worry about these things. And then lo and behold, Donald Trump gets reelected in 2024. And here we sit. Here's today's politics. So,
does that change going into the midterms? I don't know if the Democrats have the gumption to change that attitude. I just don't know.
So first of all, in the Trump era, a year is an eternity. Mm-hmm. We have no idea, Bruce, if we're sitting here together doing a program in a year from now, what our political landscape will look like. We don't know what's going to be going on. Will the Russia-Ukraine war have subsided? Will the Palestinian conflict with Israel have subsided? What will the role be of Syria? Will we be, I hate to say this because I don't want to sound trivial, will we be at war with Iran? We do not know what will happen between now and next year at this time. But as it lays today, I think you would still have to think that if there was an election tomorrow, the Democrats would be in good shape to win that midterm election, which is why we're hosting the show today about these attempts to gerrymander, because it's a way of changing it around. It's a way of the Republicans recognizing the fact, hey, if we can squeeze 5 more House seats out of red Texas, we need to squeeze them out. I don't think that's a long-term winning strategy, because when you really break down a lot of those more liberal blue states, Bruce, the Democrats are going to be able to do the same thing too.
But we also know that Donald Trump is Harry Houdini. Don't look at what I'm doing here, see what's going on over there, and you know what? Because of that deception, reality's out the window.
Yeah, it's a listen, if you can call it Houdini, you can be negative, or you can say it's a political gift. If you're just looking at political...
It is a political gift.
It's a political gift.
I'm not going to deny that.
It's hard to have ever known a politician who has the ability to create distraction more than Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And control his own news cycle. We talked in a previous program about the difficulty he had putting out the Jeffrey Epstein fires, mm-hmm. Okay? That's a one-off for Donald Trump.
Oh, it's not even smoldering now.
No, but typically in Donald Trump's political past, ever since he came on the scene with Barack Obama, of course claiming Barack Obama was not born in the United States, that he was Kenyan or whatever the case may be, challenging the veracity of his birth certificate, which, by the way, would not have mattered anyway. He could have run for president because he had an American mother. Sorry, Donald, I don't even know if you really think about it, what was the whole point of the exercise. He's had very, very little problems, though, man, controlling the narrative, ever. And I think you're going to try to see him do that, too. More interesting to the gerrymandering issue for me, however, is going to be Donald Trump trying to explain to his voters why not to vote absentee, why not to use an absentee ballot. And when he comes out and says, and I hate to use this word, Bruce, I really do, because I don't think it's constructive, but when you literally put out a statement claiming the United States is the only country on earth using mail-in ballots, that's a lie. That's a flat-out lie. I mean, Germany, Austria, other countries around Earth use paper ballots. You may not like them, but you're snowing the people. Anyone on Truth Social is somebody following Donald Trump who really believes Donald Trump. You're flat out lying to your own supporters.
Well, he still has people who believe that he won
the election,
against Joe Biden.
I know that. Yeah, well, and you're never going to convince them otherwise either.
No.
You're never going to convince them otherwise.
Do you find it interesting, a dichotomy here, that the Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and members of his leadership team continue to advocate for voting rights advancements and other key policies, but have not made them central to their opposition to Trump and his Republican allies in Congress, which is what we were just talking about?
Yeah, one of the things I would say, it's interesting, but Hakeem Jeffries is somebody who's more interesting to me than with respect, probably the question. He's risen through the ranks of House leadership and is the heir apparent. I mean, he is the Democratic minority leader right now, despite the presence of Nancy Pelosi still being in the chamber. And yet there's times...
You don't think she's pulling his strings?
Oh, well, of course, to a certain degree, but I think she's in a state of semi-retirement, okay? Mm-hmm. There are times when you watch Hakeem Jeffries perform that the fecklessness of his performance is almost stunning, because he can't seem to get anything done, nor can he seem to communicate in a way which resonates with anybody outside of his party's leadership. I think, again, they have cynicism. I think he's a huge hero. The corporate class, the Democratic donor class, like Hakeem Jeffries, he's a good foot soldier. He introduces legislation that they want and that they're interested in. So when you're asking, why don't they pivot to good election outcomes or better, who does that serve? What corporate interest does actually having clean and fair elections serve? It's not that he's not necessarily interested in them, but that's not where he's at politically.
Unlike Mike Johnson, who just gets it done on behalf of his boss.
Perfect choice for speaker. Came from nowhere. Mike Johnson was somebody who really lived in political anonymity, was not very well known even in the Louisiana conference. And he's been the perfect speaker for Donald Trump. He literally does anything that Donald Trump asks. And by the way, rather effectively, too.
That was my point.
Very, very effectively.
Hakeem, not effective.
Yeah.
Mike Johnson, extremely so.
Very effective. Yeah, very effective. I mean, you'll remember the big story when this administration started and with the Biden administration was how would they take that band of 20 Republicans, that Freedom Caucus group, and how would they be willing to herd them together? But when was the last time you heard the word Freedom Caucus on a broadcast or on an article?
Yeah.
He has them in line. He has them in lockstep. They're all working in a coordinated function. They've all gotten their orders. They realize the narrowness of the difference, which is in the House of Representatives. And to the point of this exercise to reapportion the districts in mid-cycle, this is all about keeping power, man. They understand the power game.
And he's not a punching bag like his predecessors.
No, not at all.
No.
No,
he deflects extremely well.
Right. Well, which is why his predecessors left, which is why John Boehner retired, which is why Paul Ryan retired, which is why Kevin McCarthy was forced out. They weren't the kind of people. I don't want to give them the credit of saying that there's still something about the institution there that they respected, but I think that they definitely believed that by the time you were in the Republican Party and you made your way to Speaker of the House, that you had some of your own political cachet, that you weren't just going to be following the leader of the person who's down in central. Even when he's out of office, that the president's still not running the party as Trump was between 20 and 24. Mike Johnson's perfectly suited for that.
He knew what his job was.
Absolutely.
He was Donald Trump's, what's the word they use when you're the person who is there just to do what your boss tells you to do?
Well, you could say a ventriloquist puppet. You could say that. I mean, that
didn't want to go that far.
Well, yeah.
Back to Gavin Newsom. He is leaning into the redistricting fight as he looks to build his national profile. Run for president in 2028 potentially. But the move comes with political risks for him, no doubt.
For Newsom?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you're going to run for president, though, this is going to be the time. He might be out there. I mean, if you look at, and by the way, Donald Trump, the presidency of Joe Biden, they've thrown a lot of this political wonkishness out the window because everything, I mean, who runs a candidate for president of the United States, pulls them in June, and then doesn't have a primary and just says she's the person who's your candidate? Only the undemocratic party would do something like that, quite frankly. So these are different times. But when you're looking at somebody like Newsom, what I would say, he's out there early. Some would say too early, considering the length of time, and we're talking about the midterms of 2026, he can't start running for president in earnest until 2027, and then, of course, the cycle in 2028, right? So he's going to be out there. He's going to be exposed for a very long time. Historically, some of those people who get out in front of the field like that and try to take leadership positions, the public, and even especially within the party, they've already developed a fatigue by them by the time it actually gets to go. By the time you're looking at, South Carolina, New Hampshire. By the way, another interesting episode for the future, the changing of the presidential election map per the Democratic Party, removing Iowa from its traditional position, which is a really interesting topic. But they can already be burned out on the voter. Okay? And then the other thing, too, and this is one of the reasons why I think I'm going to, in some ways, miss the structure of the Iowa caucus, is that traditionally in the past, if you were looking at becoming president, Bruce, you had to do all 99 counties. You had to get a bus tour. You had to drive through all of Iowa. You had to eat the deep-fried whatever it was and, kiss the babies and go to the Iowa State Fair and do all that stuff. Well, one, that won't be relevant anymore. But two, will Newsom really have the legs to appeal? Well, first of all, would he have, even if he waited, would he have the appeal for that kind of voter, right? Yeah. How will Gavin Newsom do when he goes to South Carolina, which is largely an older, traditional African-American Democratic electorate? How will he play there? We know that that's the electorate that saved Joe Biden when he got elected president in 2020. But who's going to be able to go in there as a favored candidate? I think right now, though, what Newsom's doing for the Democratic Party is going to be very well received, man. Yeah. This is something that the Dems have needed. They've needed somebody to lead. I can tell you just in my own life, I talked to a lot of Democrats who don't like Gavin Newsom, but they love what he's doing right now because they don't feel like Hakeem Jeffries and anyone else in the Democratic Party is pushing back against this president. By the way, I can't knock Jeffries. He's right. He's not in a position where he can really do a lot. Okay, especially considering that Mike Johnson has totally galvanized Republican support and that you don't have the Lauren Boeberts or other people there that you can pick off. They seem to be very, very tight. But yeah, I think it would be a perfectly fine time for Newsom to run. He's not going to wait any more cycles than that. I mean, you're not going to be looking at Gavin Newsom in 2032 because then you've got a whole new gaggle of younger Democrats coming up through the queue.
Yeah, and you're right. Hakeem Jeffries is there for now. We'll worry about, later. Interesting thing about Newsom is he's got the California burden. I'm not sure that Iowa is going to be a big factor this year because there's talk about the fact that maybe that shouldn't be the first caucus. Number two, Newsom's taken on Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is a whole interesting dynamic.
Yeah. And by the way, it's funny when you talk about the California factor as well, too. It really gives you, looking back in time, and I'm not talking about his policy, just him as a politician, the allure that Ronald Reagan had in this country. Can you imagine in today's politics a Republican from California winning Massachusetts and Hawaii? I mean, that is the kind of, you don't see that kind of, I mean, for all of Donald Trump's popularity within the Republican Party, my goodness, Reagan's support was deeply bipartisan back when he ran for president.
It was a different time, though.
It was a much different time in our politics.
But if you've noticed, Gavin Newsom, his communication style has changed over the past month. He's become very, very feisty, and that's not an accident.
I think he's talking, quite frankly, I think he's talking about, and he's talking publicly like he's always talked in private. I think you're starting to see the more public. You're starting to see the more real Gavin Newsom now. You're not seeing the guy who looks like a 55-year-old Ken doll, from California. Like you're seeing. I think you're seeing the organic guy, the guy who scrapped his way up through. The guy who came up through San Francisco politics and fought his way through that machine. Yeah. That's exactly what I think.
Put on the boxing gloves. Yeah. And it's interesting because when he was asked about the implications and the risk, he said, "Look, the biggest risk is not taking one," and he may be right about that. Yeah.
No, I would totally agree with him. What do they have to lose right now?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking about 28% popularity as a party, that's rock bottom, man. You are really in a two-party system like the United States. When you get down to 27%, you've lost a significant layer of what you've considered to be your previous base, okay? I mean, it's very easy for us to say, well, Donald Trump's always had 40% core. I'd argue that's still what he has today, with some Republicans waiting for him. But when you're the Democratic Party and you need to have a rich, multiracial, multi-income coalition in order to win, to get elected, and you've got yourself a 27% approval rating, what does Newsom have to lose at this point?
Right. And you and I were talking before the show, how does Gavin Newsom play, when the time comes in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and some of the blue-collar states? If they see the scrappy boxer as opposed to the Ken doll, does it become a different part of the equation?
Yeah, I think, what happened was, again, if you look at a figure, obviously like Andrew Gillum, who ran for governor here in Florida, if you look at an Eddie Rendell, who we talked about, who ran for governor in Pennsylvania, Ed Rendell, and I grew up in Deer Country in Pennsylvania, Ed Rendell has no business going to Elks County or Sullivan County, Pennsylvania, and trying to run for president.
But Ed was scrappy.
He was scrappy. And when he went in there with a strategy. Because he looked at it and he said, you know what, I'm not going to get more than 25% of this vote. But if I barnstorm these rural counties and can bump them up to 35, that's going to give me the margin I want.
But Ed was down and dirty. He did. He put on the boxing glove. He didn't care about getting into a street fight.
No, but Ed would also go into like a store in small town Pennsylvania and be like, "What's that? An antler rack?" And just like,
he had a street charm.
Yeah, he had a street charm to him that you can't duplicate. And people were like, "Yeah, Mr. Mayor, that's a deer head." But he was able to push enough of that up. Andrew Gillum was doing events in Green Cove Springs when he ran for governor, and packing people in to come see him because they wanted to hear a new kind of message. So I don't think it's beyond Gavin Newsom. I just think you have to be realistic at what the expectations are. And the other thing I think that you could do too from a consultant standpoint, when you go back to Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Nebraska, these are people who are very sensitive to the idea that they feel they are in flyover country, okay? You need to make an orchestrated effort to make them feel like they are never being flown over by you ever again. And the Democrat who's able to get in there and kind of touch people in that way, again, you don't have to get Nebraska to vote, completely blue. That is not the point. But you darn sure want to make sure you get that one congressional out of their district in Omaha every single time that they have the election. You want to try to move that needle in some of these other states. Barack Obama won Indiana, Bruce. I know that seems like an eternity ago, but there were enough votes, suburban votes, in and around Indianapolis that you could, depending upon how you reach voters, you can win that. Barack Obama won North Carolina, man.
Look, it's no accident Barack Obama reinvented himself depending on the audience that he was addressing.
Another gifted politician, just in a different way.
But we're not making any endorsements here. We're just talking about reality. People who know how to play to audiences succeed.
Oh, that's exactly right. Just in different ways. I mean, we saw...
Right.
Ronald Reagan's natural charm, that and as an actor was
a great communicator.
Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, who could sell ice to an Eskimo. I'm still convinced to this day, because it's just the nature of his personality and how he could work a room. And by the way, I put him in the same group. Donald Trump. There is a certain kind of voter that Donald Trump appeals to. They like him. They like his bravado. They like him as president. Now, it may not be some in your audience. It might be others who listen to the program. But the reality of it is, and then a number of people who don't find Obama charming at all. But there's an appeal there for every kind of voter.
Right.
Okay. So
politicians that they believe, whether they're telling the truth or not, are being straightforward with them and telling it like it is in their minds, succeed.
Yeah. And I think the other question too, when you look at the midterms going into next year too, and you look at these efforts to gerrymander, is asking yourselves the question, as we were before we got on the program, what does a field for Democrat running look like that beyond Gavin Newsom. And then the other question, I think, I am no longer taking this flippantly. I was, and to my, will Donald Trump try to stay in office? I think it's becoming a more serious question.
He's got 2028 hats.
2028 hats, and every time in the past that I've snickered about Donald Trump doing something, he's went ahead and done it and got it done anyway.
And you know, he made that flip comment during the recent meeting with Zelensky and the European leaders. So if there's a war, we don't have to have an election in 2028?
Yeah. Yeah, in 3.5 years. If there's a war in 3.5 years, we don't have to have an election.
You know, people.
The room laughed. I was not laughing.
No, I was not laughing anything.
Yeah.
You don't put anything past Donald Trump. Let's look at what's really at stake here. A wave of mid-decade redistricting could determine whether President Trump will be empowered to bring us more and more MAGA in the last 2 years of his term, or if his legislative plans will be stymied by Democrats who would chair committees investigating stuff that Trump wants to keep quiet. There is the reality.
Yeah, and there's something else that I would discourage the Republicans from doing, or the Democrats from doing, excuse me, Bruce. They're going to, assuming that everything goes to what we think, and the Democrats get out of the midterms next year with some sort of majority. Let's just say, for example, based on today's subject topic, that all of these states decide to gerrymander, the courts let all of these states gerrymander, it ends up being a wash or maybe slightly favoring the Democrats, and then they get reelected, okay? How would it possibly, what will the Democrats have learned if they go down another 2-year road between the presidential election where all they're doing is investigating Donald Trump, okay? They've impeached Donald Trump twice, Bruce. We can argue the merits of those impeachments. We can argue what happened in the Senate. And there is it's the same kind of fatigue I think the American people felt when we tried to impeach Bill Clinton for his affairs and his lying under oath about Monica Lewinsky. Okay, it's going to end up, and what ended up happening in the 2000 election, it backfired on the Republicans. They thought they had the momentum, they thought they were going to get rid of President Clinton, and the American people became exhausted by it. I could easily see another round of investigations on by then what would be an 81-year-old president who can't run again, trying to just continue to hammer him with investigations. I think that's when you got to say, and that's what I would tell the Democratic consultant class, that's where you need to launch your new vision for the Democratic Party. What does it stand for? What are you actually going to do that represents
the bottom line is, look, you can't afford groceries right now. You can't afford to buy a new car. You can't afford to stay in your house. What's important to you? So here's the fun.
And by the way, the political winner for me, with great apologies, if you're still dealing with inflation, or let's just be honest, even if inflation were to ebb today and go back to a rate which the Fed would like, 2%, okay? The reality is we're never going to have deflation to bring things back down to the prices they were. Right. This is the new price set that we have in the United States, okay? So if you're the Democrats, if I'm the Democrats, I am running on the fact that, we may not be able to fix these prices, but we can increase the federal minimum wage, which you could have business owners, people in the chamber who don't like this policy, but as a political winner, increasing the federal minimum wage is hugely popular.
And how about rebuilding the government infrastructure? Because so much is, the medical research, the ability to feed people who live in a food desert and can't get the seniors whose food's been taken away from them.
Yeah.
The fact that cancer research, cardiac research, things like that have been gutted. Rebuilding that the education system has been detrimentally hurt.
And also too, when you look at our 3 layers of government too, it's trickled all the way down. I mean, think right now that local Republicans think they're scoring political victories over Donna Deegan by taking Meals on Wheels away from 2,000 seniors, because that's something which is going to be popular. Or they think they're going to pull something over on Mayor Deegan by saving a tiny little bit of money in an area which is critically important to a specific population who need it, okay? That kind of thing's going on all over the country right now. You said next week's topic's about Doge, right? Think about Duval Doge, Florida Doge, Birmingham, Alabama Doge, Bruce. They did it everywhere, okay? Trying to go in and trying to needle these really a finite amount of services with a small price tag, trying to inflict pain on people for political gain. And it's unfortunate for me, because it's kind of like, yeah, there's always some place that you can find savings, and we could have an honest.
And the witch hunt that's coming in. Trying to find something that doesn't exist.
And we could have an honest disagreement, Bruce, for example, about whether or not and to what degree we should be funding museums that say can't turn a profit. Mm-hmm. Taking food away from seniors because you want to do something politically performative, I rue the fact that we're living in that kind of environment.
So you mentioned fatigue. People don't watch real news, okay? And I can get into that argument again. I've done it a zillion times. There are no real newspapers anymore that delve into the issues. There are not a lot of TV news programs that present factual news anymore. Does the American public understand what's going on, and do they even care? I don't know.
I don't know. Let me channel my inner George Orwell to answer this question. I think that the American...
By the way, I took a lot of crap
Yeah,
last week because I said that some of the things that are going on in the Trump administration are Orwellian. They are.
Yeah.
That's a fact. And you know what? You can come at me all you want. The fact is, there are things that are going on that are Orwellian. And if you don't, you've got your eyes closed.
Let me just say generally, I think this is a nonpartisan statement. Okay. I don't think that the American people appreciate the level to which they are propagandized on a daily basis by news media, Western media in general. Okay. Obviously, they're aware of the fact quite often that, you know, if you're going to Fox News or Newsmax or MSNBC on the other side,
or CNN,
you're seeking out infotainment. And I think opinion pieces. I think most people are aware of that. But I will remember, I think it was in what was it? Oh, somebody tried to, before Tucker Carlson left Fox News, somebody tried to sue Tucker Carlson for defamation. And the judge threw out the case saying that no reasonable viewer would think that Tucker Carlson's an honest actor. So now the question becomes, who's turning on there who actually believes what they're reporting is newsworthy, or do they know that they're watching opinion news? I'd argue, I think that most Americans know it. I think that they enjoy going there and that they enjoy what we refer to as confirmation bias. They want to watch people who don't challenge them, but they don't want to watch people who give them cognitive dissonance or you know, literal discomfort because they're saying something that they don't want to hear. But I think to your point, and I think this is what you were getting at, and I apologize.
No, you don't apologize.
Is the decline in what we used to refer to as straight news. Okay, going all the way back to the elimination of the Fairness Doctrine, to the Telecommunications Act of 1990.
When there were just 3 networks.
When there were just 3 networks and both sides had to be presented on every broadcast. Of course, Reagan got rid of that in '87. Clinton deregulated cable in 1997, which is when you effectively saw hundreds of outlets now become 5 with 90% ownership. So I think both of those things have contributed to a decline. I mean, Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Okay, it would be naive of any of us to think that there's not editorializing taking place based on the owner's wishes there.
You had the obituary editor from the Washington Post resign because he didn't like what was going on because he had to manipulate certain information.
The obit editor. I mean, that's where you're at. Okay, I mean it's like next to the person who places ads in the back of the grocer. You know, I mean, like what's going to happen to them? You know, it's kind of insane. And I don't, you know, outside of looking to independent news media, I still think there are a lot of people that I would plug openly in that lane. I think Nate Monroe over at the Tributary here locally in Jacksonville does a really, really good job with what he does. I think you have contemporaries here at some local channels in town who for as much as they're able, do yeoman's work trying to really cover this stuff. I think oftentimes I miss the doggedness of Jim Pickett on this network, tracking down local officials. You know, holding them to the fire, making them uncomfortable. I mean, Bruce, I would tell you that if you're old enough, there was a time in the 1930s and 40s, if you were walking down the street and you were a politician and you saw a newsman, you ran like hell. Because you didn't want them asking you questions. You got out, okay? Today, that relationship, I mean, the ability of which we see Republicans and Democrats just jumping back and forth from administration to administration really gives you the idea of what kind of journalist a lot of these folks are. I'm not suggesting they're not good people. Don't misunderstand me. But in terms of actually being journalism, there's been a decline. There's a decline. President company excluded, of course.
I get attacked because I ask questions that a lot of you don't like. You think they're unfair because they're probing questions.
Yeah.
That's my job. Plain and simple. I don't have to follow. It doesn't mean that I've got a political opinion that I'm trying to get across. It means that there's something that I want, a point that I want to get across, that there is a question that needs to be asked because something doesn't seem right, or I want you to open your eyes to something. You make your own opinion. You know, I don't have a political agenda.
No agenda, but I would say, and I hope to be fair to you, be fair to myself and any of your guests that you have on in the future, human beings are biased creatures. We all come into a topic with our own bias. We can try to be and that's what really the question becomes, Bruce. Are you trying to be fair? Are you trying to illuminate a topic? And as long as you're doing both of those things, as a journalist or as a commentator, I think you're doing right. But because clearly we're all going to have, I mean, there's no way you can grow up in Philadelphia, grow up in Pennsylvania, move to Jacksonville, and not have opinions about things. We all have our own opinions about things. But are you approaching them fairly? Are you approaching them equitably? Are you, and this is the biggest challenge I put to people, are you listening to people as much as you're ready to hear yourself talk? because those are really the keys, I think, for moving and learning and understanding what's going on.
Yeah, I've told you this story. When I think it was in 10th grade, I had a debate class, and the teacher said, so where do you stand on a certain opinion? And then the teacher said to us, okay, you are going to debate the opposite view. And we're like, what? How do you want us to be passionate about something we don't believe in? And the teacher's supposition was, I want you to learn how to, number one, find out about other people's thinking, find out and research other opinions, and learn how other people think and how they've come to their opinions and how to learn to respect those opinions. And only then, because he knew what I wanted to do with my life, will you be able to understand how the world works and respect others.
And along those lines, too, what I would say, and I try to do this myself in my own life, when you hear somebody with an opinion which differs than yours and you try to examine it, don't straw man their position.
Right.
Steel man their position. Do the best job you possibly can understanding what it is that they're trying to say and from their perspective. Then try to defeat the argument. Because then you're really, really getting at the core of what they believe, but in a way which is not disingenuous. You're not putting them down, you're not making fun of them. You're trying to intellectually understand how they feel, whether it's taxation, gun, whatever the issue may be. Don't misrepresent them. Completely represent them. And then go after them and why you don't feel that they're right. And that,
or we can agree to disagree.
And you know what? That's a great thing too, man. I mean, that used to be our politics. That used to be the nature of it. You walk away, you shake hands, and you're like, hey, take care. And then that's it. And today, you know, and we, you know, social media and everything, that's increasingly difficult because myself included, I say things online to people that I would probably never say face to face. It's the nature of how easy.
That's why I'm off social media.
Well, you're a better man than I am, then.
And why I don't talk around the dinner table politics with even family members.
Well, yeah, that can be fun though too.
Depends. Yeah. Thank you for watching
See why
Politics and Power.
every day more people are choosing News4JAX, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.